Okay, let's have a quick look at physics and soft cloth and the issues that you've been talking about. First off, Rampa's perfectly correct. The ability to turn off the object gravity after you've done a sim works very well. Rampa does some great tips, and he does great tutorials. The thing though is that if you have hundreds of objects in your scene simming, this can be a bit of a pain, of course. That's why there are global buttons up here. But the thing about leaving these buttons on for soft cloth all the time, sure, that's relevant. But I think I talk about this in the tutorial series. When you have a very heavy scene, say you have a scene with like 6, 8 characters and every single one has a dress and hair like this, you'll find that your machine will slow down a lot because of all the collisions going on in the clothing on all the characters in the scene at the same time. And that's when you have to bake at the scene level. So if you turn this off, cloth doesn't get baked, and I do cover this in the course, but let's go through it now. So first thing we know is that we just have some animation applied here. This is the bowling, just like your scene. I do want to point out something that I've mentioned before. If I zoom in and we look at her closely, and that is that, and I do talk about this as well, you sometimes have to have what's called a pre-roll time for your animation. The sim takes time to work up. Notice her hair falls into place, and this is all to do with the physics settling because they're driving everything in the scene. So generally speaking, you need to avoid having this inside your animation. So if you render this, you're going to get all that rubbish at the beginning where the sim is kind of getting settled and getting ready. So as I mentioned in the tutorials, it's always a good idea to have a few seconds at the beginning of your animation if you're using physics in this manner to allow the physics to settle before the bit where you actually want to render out the movie is, because otherwise you'll get all of this in your movie. So you can do that. I can just make sure that I've got highly selected. You can see the bowling animation here, and I could say I'll give myself 2 seconds, which is 120 frames at 60 frames a second, if you remember. That's what iClone runs at. And I can just bring the motion forward to about there, and it doesn't have to be dead accurate. And now what's going to happen is there's nothing happening here. The motion happens here, starts to happen here. But by doing this, if I rewind to the beginning, this dead space at the front is going to be used by the sim to settle her hair down before we get into the actual motion. And then when we come to render, of course, we just set our in-frame range to about here on our timeline, and that's what will render out. We won't get this dead space at the beginning. So that's the first thing to remember. So let's just nip back to our camera. Okay, so now that we have looked at that, let's do the release of the ball. So I'm just going to do it quick and dirty. So there we are, about there. I'm just going to do it about there. So here we are. So I'm going to grab our ball and go to physics. It's been kinematic from day one. And you know how to do all of this. And let's switch it to dynamic. So now that should now function. So let's just run that. So we're now into our motion, and it goes straight through the floor. And that's because you have to make sure all your objects in the scene have physics, which I didn't do. So let's grab our floor, activate physics, make it static. Let's try that again. There we go. Right, so now we have our sim. Now, there's a couple of things to note. One is her arm is close enough to her dress to affect the dress. You'll notice as her arm swings by her dress, her hand hits the dress. That is actually picked up in the sim, so you can see that disturbance. It's actually the ball that's striking the dress. You see it pull there. So as the dress gets the pull on it, you may not like that, and that means you need to alter the motion of the actual avatar. But let's not worry about it at the moment. Let's just look at the sim first off. So the first thing is I'm going to set a timeline for this. So let's just have a look. So let's do about 500 frames. So we don't need all this extra space for this. I probably need a little bit more. So let's do 600 frames. Move my end marker. So sorry about that. It's early in the morning over here. That's my excuse. That's early-ish. Right, there we go, fine. So we've got a sim now. And if we turn this off, there'll be no more simming, or as Ramper has pointed out, you can turn off the actual activation of the object itself. But keep in mind that if you have like 100 skittles in the scene, then going to every single one and turning this off is a bit of a pain, so you can do it. That's what the global level buttons up here are for. And remember, simming is always the last thing you do before you render. You might just spend a lot of time animating and lighting and whatever. The last thing you're going to do is sort your sim work out, so that once you've finally got it, you can bake it and fix it. And this is what I'm going to show you. So anyway, we've got our sim, so let's select the ball. And with the ball selected down here, I'm just going to reveal our animation time track. And we won't see anything unless we fit the window. I'm just going to fit the window. So here's our physics recording right down the end here. So that means we can now scrub our timeline, and that is baked, because although the global physics is on, the physics for the ball, of course, is off at this point. So, and that was turned off after the baking. As I said, excellent tip by Ramper. Okay, so what about our soft cloth now? Well, as you demise, and I think this is the problem you're running into, of course, if you turn off the physics here and you run the sim, there is no sim, because obviously you've turned everything off at the global level, and her dress is just deforming based on the what's called the deformation of the actual mesh. So in other words, when you have a character in iClone, in the old-fashioned iClone, the clothing would be skinned along, to the actual rig of the character, and the rig would be causing the deformation of the clothing. And that's the way, a lot of characters still works, especially characters with things like, with no cloth, like, trousers and sleeved shirts and things like that, that don't have any physics. They will all be skinned to the rig of the character, the bones of the character. So that means you have to have the dress simming. So how do you do it if you want to record? Now I'm turning on both rigid and soft cloth here. If I only turn on soft, you may think, well, why do I turn on both? Because if I've already done the ball and that was rigid and I don't really need that. Well, you can turn this off, but what will happen is the cloth will no longer simulate with rigid objects in the scene. And that actually will include her legs. See, her leg is a rigid object. And if I turn off rigid, you'll see the clothing has gone right through her thighs. And that is because the rigid is off as well as the soft cloth. That rigid is off. So you have to have rigid on, because characters themselves, like their arms and limbs, are considered to be rigid objects. And it's those envelopes that are doing the collision, which are rigid objects with the cloth that you saw. So now that we have that on, we get our sim, but the problem is it resims every time, as you've pointed out. If you turn this off, then suddenly it's not simming anymore. So what's the point? Well, this is really important when you get a very, very heavy scene. If you have 5 or 6 characters in the scene, as I said, all having soft cloth, all having hair, your computer will start slowing down really rapidly, and your FPS up here will drop. And that's fine, because you're going to be rendering a movie out at the end of the day. So if you can't get real time, that's not an issue. But it is an issue for physics, because obviously it's taking ages to play back with all these physics objects turned on and this turned on up here, because every time you play the timeline, every single character that's got cloth or hair is going to simulate every time you hit play, and that is intensive for the computer. So with that said, what do we do? Well, what you do is you have to bake the cloth simulation as well. So when you're really happy with the scene and all your characters are doing what they want to do from the animation point of view, then the last thing you want to do is say, okay, I'm going to bake the cloth. And to do that, you need to make sure an option's turned on. So let's have a look at that right now. And that feature is in the project panel, so let's bring that up. And it'll be under global physics settings, so make sure that rollout is open. And you'll see that it's saying we have our physics engine, and we have all these rigid body stuff turned on. But notice we have soft cloth physics turned on, and this is the same as turning this button off up here. If I turn it off, the button goes grey. So it's the same button, okay? But there are 2 features here, and they're really important, and this is the main one. I'm not going to worry about the soft cloth. That's an advanced thing, but soft cloth versus soft cloth. But here is bake animation, and what this is going to do is it's going to bake the cloth simulation for Heidi's dress, and so that we can keep it on a permanent basis. So let's make sure we can see that. So I'm going to select Heidi and bring her into the timeline. Let's minimize these other two. Let's go and find. Now, interesting enough, remember cloth goes on the dress, because this is we have to check where the cloth is going. If this is a CC character, it's in a different place. Some of them have physical dresses, like her hair here is an item, but if not, then the cloth will be going on the character instead of the dress. So this is a G6 character, not a CC character. So we should find soft cloth here, and there we go. There's the soft cloth track. There's nothing in it at the moment, of course. So let's make sure we're at frame 1. Now, the really good thing about most important thing about soft cloth when when you're going to bake your final one is you want quality of collision, and the recommending is that you get it by frame mode. And this is mentioned by Earl a lot. If you're doing soft cloth and you want good collision, and it's your final animation that you're ready for making a movie from, turn on by frame. So what we're going to do now, let's do the sim. So we have soft cloth and rigid on, and we're just going to do a sim now. And obviously we have our run-up time that we set before. And obviously it's going to be slow because it's doing it every single frame, but that's what we want. We want it to calculate every frame, so there's no, we minimize the chance of intersections occurring on our character. And there we go. So now we've done our sim. Notice the sim track is now populated with the soft cloth recording. I'm immediately going to come up here and turn off both of these. And the sim doesn't go away, it's now baked. And it's baked because we had the button on. Now notice it's all turned itself off because I've obviously turned these off, but the tick box for bake animation is on. That means that we've got this recording in that track. And if we wind back now, we're no longer simming, we're actually playing back everything from a baked simulation. So both the ball and the soft cloth are now baked, and that means that we can run in real time. So if I go back and turn into real time mode, it doesn't matter anymore because this is now pre-recorded, and now we have our recording. It's in real time. It all looks good because the computer's no longer having to make all those heavy duty calculations about doing the cloth. Now this is one character, and I'm running a GTX 780. But, as I said, if you had like 10 characters or 5 characters, all with cloth and hair like this, like 5 versions of Heidi, you would start to notice a serious slowdown when you were trying to, run the scene in real time with all the physics settings turned on. So that's why you have the global physics settings, and that's why you have the bake option. It's designed so that you can take complex scenes and bake everything in, so that when you're finally ready to do the rendering, you're no longer having the overhead of all the simulation work constantly being recalculated. And that's kind of really, how it all works. So, final thing, I suppose, quickly, is I mentioned the whole thing about the dress penetration. This is caused by the ball hitting her dress. So I am going to turn all our simming back on again, which means that this will get re-recorded each time because I've still got the bake thing on. Then what you need to do is you need to kind of check the pose of the character. To do that, we go to have the character selected, we go to edit motion layer, and I'm just going to take her shoulder and I'm just going to rotate it out very slightly, and that's going to pull it away from the body. And then going to go forward in time to past the point where the ball comes back here for the release. I'm going to make sure that I have Heidi's motion layer track selected, which is where the keyframes for the edit motion layer dialog go. So motion layer, I'm going to force a key there using the add key button. This is what's called a hold key. So now I know that at this point we're back to the original the original motion, except because I altered her body at the frame 1, I have to do a reset. So there we go. So that's now the actual original motion capture clip at that point in time. And up here I've made that little correction. So if the correction still doesn't work at the passing point, like here, and you think, oh, it's still running through the dress or too close, then at this point you would come in and make a further correction to make absolutely certain that her hand and the ball therefore was away from her dress, because if the ball collides with the dress, it'll affect the dress basically. Now the reason it didn't collide with the dress you saw just now when I was doing it, it did before, was because of the physics being turned off on the ball. So if I come to the ball and I activate physics again, you know, it should look fine now, because I've obviously made that correction. So see, it no longer hits the dress. It catches the dress just a bit there, and that's my point. With the ball's physics turned off and baked, then basically, obviously, it wasn't part of the calculation, and obviously that's a trick you can pull if you visually can't see what's going on. Then the ball won't affect the dress at all. But if it's key that you have to have the ball as part of the simulation all the time, and you're re-simming, there's the dress getting caught right there. See it? We can make another correction at this point. So let's get edit motion there up for our character, and I'm going to correct her shoulder out again to make sure the ball's away. I might want to correct this last frame here, because obviously that's quite close and her arm might snap into the new position. But let's wind back and see what that looks like. So, and all I'm doing now is I'm correcting her arm motion to make sure the ball doesn't strike her dress, and there it is. So there you go. The ball no longer strikes her dress at all. And so say now that we're happy with all of this, and we say, okay, well, you know, this is really working now. The ball's got the motion I want. The dress has got all the motion I want. Well, that's when you can, if you've done this on all the characters, you can just globally turn off everything. And now all of that is baked, because I had the bake option on for her dress, and the ball, of course, has just simmed itself as well. But because I've now globally turned off the simming, everything is now baked into the timeline. Okay, and obviously I could have done that last sim frame by frame for accuracy, but you know, I'm just making a point here of how the whole system works. Okay, so I hope that clarifies things a bit about how the whole simming and baking thing works in iClone, and yeah, let me know if you have any further problems, and we'll see if we can help.